The following program is an original production of WYCC PBS Chicago.
Tonight, no more illegal evictions. How the Attorney General and Cook County Sheriff are working to protect the rights of tenants and homeowners going through foreclosure. Plus, calling all cars. Should the Illinois State Police patrol Chicago's highest crime neighborhoods? And board up art. It's a colorful alternative to demolition. These stories and more tonight on In the Loop. Good evening, I'm Chris Bury. Barbara Pinto is on assignment. Imagine coming home after a long day at work to find the key doesn't fit the lock anymore. That's been the recent experience of hundreds of Illinois residents in foreclosure. Some even find all their belongings dumped on the sidewalk. All are victims of allegedly illegal evictions conducted by companies that banks hire. State Attorney General Lisa Madigan has filed a lawsuit against the country's largest bank contractor, Safeguard Properties.
Here in Illinois, we are aware of at least 400 complaints against Safeguard. And so clearly they're unregulated and they're engaging in illegal activity that has to be stopped. They are going in and they are essentially engaging in a private eviction service before the court process is fully gone through. And so really before somebody should be legally dispossessed of their homes. Banks are hiring contractors who are supposed to determine whether or not a home is vacant.
But Madigan's lawsuit alleges that even in cases where a home is clearly still occupied, Safeguard subcontractors have illegally entered homes, sometimes using a sledgehammer to bust down the door and change the locks. A spokesperson for Safeguard says the company follows industry best practices and will vigorously defend against the lawsuit.
Somebody can't just show up and claim that they are there to evict you when there is not a court order and it is not a sheriff. There is no legal private eviction service that can just show up to take away your home and throw you out.
5 years ago, Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart ordered a moratorium on evicting renters who lived in buildings that had fallen into foreclosure. Earlier this year, Dart went after unscrupulous management companies for issuing what he called illegal eviction notices. And just this week, a new law went into effect called the Keep Chicago Renting Ordinance. It requires foreclosing banks to provide tenants a rent-controlled lease or pay tenants more than $10,000 in relocation assistance.
Homeowners need to know that even if you're in default, so even if you're behind on your payments on your mortgage, even if there is an ongoing foreclosure case that's working its way through the court system, you still have legal rights.
Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart is joining us tonight to talk more about these apparently illegal evictions. And welcome to the program, Sheriff.
Thanks for having me on, Chris.
Are the banks trying to get these companies to do their dirty work?
You know, we've seen so much of this activity out there over the course of the last, since 2008 basically, where they hire subcontractors, and frankly, I think it's more they don't care.
The banks don't care.
Yeah, they don't care. And it was abundantly clear to us when we put the first moratorium in that people just wanted us to get people out of houses and apartments. They just didn't care about the niceties of it. And so the fact that they then are hiring subcontractors who might not be following the law, could be clueless as to what the law is, doesn't surprise me at all, because it's really the behavior that we have seen, that the bottom line is they funnel things off to all these different subcontractors, whether it's the robo-signing disaster that occurred or this now, and they just have a goal of emptying these places out, and they just don't care. And we are on the streets, we're dealing with the actual people in these homes, and it's heartbreaking because I can tell you, I'm a lawyer myself. I was a criminal lawyer. I couldn't do my own closing, and here you have people who have no understanding of the law whatsoever. They're being intimidated. They're being told this is what the law is, and they're supposed to know, well, actually, no, I have these rights and this, that, and the other thing. And so what we've been going about doing for years now is we put big stickers on every door of every house that we know is in that process. So people know here are what the rules are, here's the way to get a hold of lawyers and the rest of it, because there definitely has been this entire game of misleading people going on for years now.
And are you finding that some of these subcontractors are actually breaking into homes that are obviously occupied?
Oh yeah, I mean, we have found that situation appear. We've found the other ones where they just clearly misrepresent to people that they need to get out, and if they don't get out in this time, they're going to have their stuff thrown out ahead of time. I just try to keep reinforcing to people, the eviction laws are very complicated and convoluted, and look what happened to our entire economy based on all these derivatives. These are very complicated documents, the mortgages and so on. And here you're talking to an individual who has no understanding whatsoever. They have somebody there with boards in the back of their car saying, here are the rules, you need to get out. There is an incredible amount of intimidation that goes on. And so we see this happening on a regular basis, and it's unfortunate. We try to get out in front of it, but it's hard.
We just saw in the setup piece there a video of people changing locks. Do these companies actually come in and change locks while the renters and maybe the owners are there?
I've been there. I've literally gone out to evictions. It was just one of the ones on the list that day. And the homeowners sitting there telling us that the locks have been changed on them. And we said, well, no, you can't do that. This is not allowed. And then we're talking to the people that are involved with this, and everyone's pointing fingers at somebody else as to who did it, and they're requiring them to change it immediately before they end up in jail. But we can only come across so many of them, but I've seen them myself.
And what other kinds of deceptive practices have your officers seen?
Well, you know, we've seen a lot of cases where people will lay out to folks that if you agree to get out, we'll give you some type of financial incentive, we'll do something for you. That one definitely skirts the law for sure. But the one that we see probably more so than anything else is just the outright fabrications and lies to, once again, people who are clearly naive, as well as they should be, as to what the laws are in regards to this. So, I mean, I just ask people, try to put yourselves in the position of that family. They're about to lose everything they put everything they had in. Everything is about to go out. And now they have somebody now telling them this is what the purported law is. What are they going to do? Most of them don't know. Call this, call that. We try to get as much information to them so they can get a hold of lawyers. And some of the lawyers out there are fantastic trying to help them. But it's tough trying to stay ahead of this.
There was a story recently in the paper here in Chicago that one of these companies sent out a letter to a family demanding that they remove everything within 48 hours. Is that legal?
No, it's not. It's not. We have seen letters, we've seen other representations been made, some of these companies clearly are not legal. Some of them we've tried to forward to see whether or not there can be lawsuits brought against them, but as we all know only too well, it's been very difficult to get the people who have been involved with some of this fraud and some of the deception, and honestly, some of the people that created this nightmare that we've been in.
So you're saying that the responsibility ultimately lies with the banks that hire these companies?
Yeah, you know, that's the one thing I always get such a kick out of, is that for somehow, like a citizen that goes in and writes a check and they don't have enough in their account, you know, they prosecute them, they move ahead on bouncing checks, not insufficient funds. But apparently now, if you go out and hire people to carry out your business, you're somehow immune to that and you're not required to have any understanding of what they're doing out there. Nobody else on the planet gets away with that. I know certainly my children can't get away with saying, well, we didn't know. No, you are incredibly wealthy. You have lawyers that I know only too well that are very, very smart lawyers. And you're trying to explain to me that if you're going to go hire a subcontractor, you can't bring them in for trainings. You can't explain to them this is what you can and can't do. And you can't agree to indemnify people if there are problems there. But yet somehow it's like, well, it wasn't our problem, it was a subcontractor. You can't do that.
Give us an idea of what rights that these tenants and homeowners do have. If you're facing foreclosure, your family is, what rights do you have to protect against eviction?
Well, I mean, at the outset, you are not required to leave, frankly, until you've exhausted all your legal remedies. And at that point in time, we come out there. But what we've been doing now is we come out multiple times prior to that. So we're alerting to people, here's where things are in the scheme of things. And it's only at the conclusion, and we give people notice that this really is the end of the road here. At that point is when you have to leave. Prior to us telling you have to leave, you do not have to leave.
So you have to get an official notice from the sheriff's department before you have to leave.
Yeah, I mean, the whole process is you go to court, the court gives the order comes to us, we're the ones that then communicate to people it's time for you to go. These third parties aren't all of a sudden been given some type of divine right that they can wander in and tell people, no, this date, that date, another date. And that seems to be what we're seeing going on, is what they're making it up because they know we can't be everywhere, and they know these folks are completely ignorant as to all the rights that they have there. But at the end of the day, they do not have to leave until we've come to the door and say, it's over, it's done, you got to go.
One of the largest companies in the country is named in this lawsuit. They're vigorously denying this, insisting that they follow best practices. What's your response based on what your officers have actually seen?
You know, we have had dealings with multiple companies, and I'll be honest with you, because of the way that people farm it out and subcontract it, I honestly couldn't tell you which company is subcontracted out from what one. All I can tell you is that we've had numerous incidents with multiple different companies where clearly people have crossed the line as far as what is legal and what's not legal. Clearly there's misrepresentations going on, but really hovering around all of it is this notion that we're going to get you out of there really however we can, and we'll push whatever we have to push to do that.
You have a sort of bird's eye view on the economy here. Nearly 10,000 evictions were conducted last year. Where does it stand this year?
Well, you know, that's the thing that I think people have deluded themselves about here, that somehow we're out of the woods. We're going to break a record this year. This year's number...
You're going to have even more than 10,000.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, we're going to have like 13,000 or so. We're going to break every previous year's records. We're breaking it this year. We're seeing more people than ever. Our number, I brought a woman on as a social worker to go out to the houses, try to help the families. Her caseload has exploded. It's the highest it's ever been. I was out doing evictions last week, and nothing's changed. It's just the numbers have gotten worse.
Just a few seconds left. Would you consider another moratorium on evictions? You've done it twice before.
The only reason I hesitate now is that every time I've done that, I have not been able to get the support of the legal community, whether it was the state's attorney's office or whatever, to say that I could stop doing it. And they've told me that if I don't continue to do them without their support, I jeopardize all sorts of issues and liability issues for the county. And so that's been a problem. And I often tell people, I've done it twice now. It wasn't as if 3 was going to be the lucky charm, I thought. But if I'm faced with it again, and trust me, Chris, on the street right now, when we see something that's not right, we call them off all the time. So it's not as if the massive moratorium, we don't do case by case. We see something that's wrong and illegal, we don't do them. And
all right, Sheriff, thank you so much. We are out of time. Apologize, but we appreciate you coming here.
Thanks for having me on
today. You're very welcome. State troopers to the rescue, and Cardinal George responds to Pope Francis. Those are some of the other stories trending tonight. After 13 people are shot in a park, including a baby, Governor Quinn floats the idea of bringing state police to city streets. But Chicago's top cop says, no thanks.
The fact is, we're doing better. The fact is, we have a long way to go.
I think it's reasonable because it is a lot of violence going on in Chicago.
I don't think necessarily putting more boots on the ground is going to deter crime in a very significant way.
Is the Catholic Church changing its tune about abortion, gays, and contraception? Pope Francis sounds off, and Chicago's Cardinal George weighs in.
They should be more open. A church is supposed to take everybody in.
$83,000. That's the average amount each Chicago household owes for the city's growing pile of debt.
My thing is, why are we even in debt?
That remains the million-dollar question. The new DePaul basketball arena is one step closer to reality. A design for the 10,000-seat glass-enclosed arena to be built near McCormick Place was approved this week. Nearly a fifth of the $173 million project will come from tax money. Many Chicagoans are asking why.
My first reaction is that's throwing away good money.
Joining me today are Pedro de Jesus, General Counsel for Tampico Beverages, Nick Kacherubis, Visiting Assistant Professor at DePaul University, and Adrian Samuels-Gibbs, Senior Editor of Ebony Magazine. Hello and welcome, everybody. So we have yet another terrible shooting in Chicago, 13 shot in Cornell Square Park, including a very young child. Governor Quinn is talking about maybe sending in the state police. Pedro, does that make any sense?
I think it's a great idea. You know, the police chief has taken a pretty hard stance on this, and I think he has to be very careful in getting out in front of the cameras and basically saying that everything is under control when things are clearly not under control. And if you remember 3 or 4 years ago when Rod Blagojevich was governor, he said the exact same thing, and the Daley administration reacted in very much the same way that McCarthy's reacting now. And he turned out to be wrong then. I think McCarthy's wrong now. I think if you talk to your average rank and file police officer on the street or a resident in one of these battle-torn communities, that I don't think anybody would say that they would turn away less personnel or less resources.
Nick, I guess the state police are already patrolling East St. Louis. Certainly Chicago officials aren't going to like that comparison.
Definitely not. It's a local control versus states' rights issue, and the chief of police has basically said, no, I don't want this. And so the governor's in an interesting position here because usually state aid is given when it's asked by a local community, not forced upon, but yet obviously the problem is out of control, and so the mayor and the superintendent need to get that under control. Otherwise, Quinn's going to be forced to step on those local government rights.
Adrian, your thought?
Well, you know, as a Chicagoan, I mean, I'm from here, born here, lived here my whole life. I think it's a great idea to always bring more personnel into a situation that is clearly out of control. But I do wonder, let's just say that the state police were there. Let's say somebody was there patrolling the neighborhood at the time that the shooting occurred. Where would they have been? Would they have been able to prevent somebody acting, frankly, crazy? Can you police sociopaths? Is that possible? You know, we're kind of like, you know, quarterbacking after the game is over.
So would more police just be a matter of public relations?
I think that it could work if they actually communicate, because the state police, could relieve some Chicago police officers if they actually jointly put together, maybe the state police could patrol the roads and take some police out of areas that Chicago police and let them be redistributed to areas where they need to be. Because I do think it's a locally controlled issue, an issue that the local police should be responding to. They know the areas, they know the criminals. The state police coming in doing that, I don't know if that's going to help, but I think they can work tandem to relieve those individuals and still provide safety.
And Chris, the other thing you can't really measure here is the reputational harm to the city. You know, when stories like this come out that we saw last week where 13 people were shot, that story goes around the world. I mean, that was translated in Germany and Paris and Madrid and in China. So, and people don't know that it's segregated into just a small area of the city. All they hear is that they have all this violence in Chicago. So I think that people really forget that the city's reputation is harmed when you have these types of incidences.
And is there any other issue here in Chicago that is more critical for the mayor?
More critical than violence? Gosh, I think they're all equally important. I think we need to deal with the joblessness. I think we need to deal with the schools. I mean, there's probably, when you really unpack what happened there, we'll have to ask the four guys why they did it, but we also need to figure out what's going on, that people feel moved to purchase guns, that people have access to these guns. And I know we've been having these conversations over and over and over again. Where do you purchase an AK-47? How does that happen? And how do we figure out how to stop that? Let's bring in all the policing that we can, but let's also get to the root of the problem. Some joblessness, some school issues, and maybe everything from there being food deserts. Everything stacks into everything.
I do think it is a hot button issue because, again, like Pedro had said, I've got friends around the country that say, I invite them to Chicago. Well, I don't want to come now. You're the murder capital of the country. And, Chicago needs that tourism to be able to, among other things, putting people back to work. But, the mayor needs to have this as a destination center, not a place that people don't want to go to.
And city officials seem frustrated by the fact that violent crime is actually down a little bit, about 22% this year. But when episodes like this happen, it overshadows everything else. Other big social issue in the news this week, Pope Francis saying the Catholic Church has been obsessed by what he called small-minded rules on abortion and gays. And here in Chicago, Cardinal George seems to be saying, not so fast, Your Eminence. What do you make of that?
I like the Pope. I am not a Catholic, but he has exhibited just a real humility and a real humbleness, and he seems to really be trying to connect with people across the globe. So while I understand that more strict adherence to some standards is what some people seem to like, it also seems to be that he's resonating with people. And I know that some of the parishes are suffering from a lack of money and from a lack of worshipers and people coming and participating. Maybe it's time to try something slightly different. Maybe this is going to be what these parishes need. Cardinal
George kind of went out of his way to say, look, this is not a big change in policy. This is a matter of emphasis, not church doctrine. So what should ordinary Chicagoans make of, Catholic or not? What should they make of it?
I think, again, going back to the Pope, I was excited when he took the name Francis because I've done a lot of research on Francis of Assisi, and I think the Pope has really moved in the direction of having that compassion and having that humility. I think the problem comes in is Cardinal George has always been kind of more on the hard side of this issue, and he's been known to be on the hard side of this issue. So he's, the Cardinal's only made, or the Pope has only made one comment about that. So, the Pope, I think Cardinal is kind of stepping back and saying, well, let's not change the whole, this is not a game changer here, but I do think that as the Pope continues to dialogue on this, the Cardinal will have to come in line.
Pedro, does this look to you as if there's some kind of a split in the church hierarchy?
Yeah, I could not wait to hear what Cardinal George's comments were going to be on this, because he has taken a pretty hard line stance on a lot of these social issues, contraception and abortion and gay rights and homosexuality. And when the Pope came out and made these comments, I was intrigued to see how Cardinal George was going to react. But he has stood his ground. And has taken this dissection of saying, well, it's not really a change in policy, it's really a change in what he called the pastoral approach. So in other words, all people are welcome, but not all activities are necessarily acceptable. And it's a fine line, but it's one that he's still willing to make.
But I think it's important to remember that the Pope has taken a step, and he's only made one statement, and so there's some wiggle room that the Cardinal can have. But if the Pope never says anything again about these issues, fine, the Cardinal may be right. But if the Pope continues to take steps, as a member of the leadership, the Cardinal's going to have to start to fall in line.
The emphasis so far seems to be one of compassion, not condemnation. So we have to move here from matters of church to matters of state. And here in Chicago, a think tank is reporting in Crane Chicago Business that the average city household owes about $83,000 if you break down the city's debt. And the average household income is about $60,000. So it seems like the whole city's underwater, Nick.
Well, it certainly looks that way. Obviously, when you look at that debt, though, I think this is the Achilles heels of Mayor Rahm Emanuel, and only because the debt he can't necessarily be completely controlling of. He can't make it. It's a lot of it is pension systems that rules been in place for years. The teachers as well, and he has to look for ways to solve that, but that debt is going to be his Achilles heel, I think.
So, Adrian, what do you think it's going to mean? Tax hikes, service cuts? How do you deal with that?
Well, we've already had tax hikes and service cuts, and we've also had, the equivalent of taxes that people don't want to call taxes, increases in fees and permitting and things like that. What does it mean? I think eventually we're going to have to pay people. I think that if you signed up for a contract, you deserve your pension. You deserve your pay. I don't know that we need to keep cutting services. People are already fleeing the city, and we don't want to degrade our tax base any further and lose any more police officers, lose any more teachers. But at the same time, there's just got to be a way to bring more revenue to the city in other ways so that everyone can get their just dues, get their just rewards, but we don't necessarily have to pay for everything. I mean, I'm a homeowner. I pay a ton of taxes. And I would personally like to see some other things, I'd like to see my money being used in a really effective way. So maybe we need to, if we're going to do this TIF financing, whatever it is, we need to figure out, we need to rebudget, rethink these things. But the debts do have to be paid.
Pedro, the mayor said, he was talking to the Tribune, he said he needs to buy time, he needs more revenue, and he needs more reform. Is he kicking this can down the road?
Well, part of this is the pension issue, and something in Springfield just has to be done about this, because out of all this debt that the Policy Institute identified, a third of that is long-term bonds, things that goes to build roads and bridges and schools, and two-thirds of it is unfunded pension liabilities. And Springfield really needs to act on this issue. And I know the governor put together this pension reform conference. He did that. It's been now 3 months. Reports say that they have made some progress. They have put together a recommendation, a report that, according to reports, are going to save $145 billion over the next 30 years. They've sent that to the actuaries, and now they want to send it to another set of actuaries. It's been a couple of months since the governor now froze the pay of lawmakers for their inability to act on this issue. And I suspect that not much is really going to happen on this issue until the courts rule on this issue of whether he had the authority to do that in the first place.
It's interesting here in a city that has all this debt. It still has tax money to spend for a new arena for DePaul University, about $33 million. Full disclosure, I teach at DePaul. But is this worth it to spend city money this way?
Well, that's the huge question. for residents, for people who specifically live in the South Loop and then live in Bronzeville. It's interesting because DePaul is not a public institution, and we do have other, we do have other arenas around. I mean, I think it's a great idea. Why not build a fabulous new facility? Why not have an awesome place for basketball? I mean, we're known for basketball. Why not? But at the same time, we're going to take money raised predominantly in communities of color, if I understand everything correctly, that might need some of that funding for other things. Sure, is it going to encourage more conventions to come? Perhaps. I mean, maybe I guess that's the end's goal. But I do kind of wonder what else is going on there. Do we have something happening that's not being disclosed? Maybe 20 years down the line, that's going to bring in more revenue to this facility.
Just a few seconds left. How about the design? Any quick thoughts on that?
It looks spectacular. There's no doubt about it. But it's always a question of what's the best use of these public dollars.
Somebody says it looks like a whale.
Well, and I think the thing is to remember that the city actually owns the property, and it will be a city facility whether DePaul uses it or somebody else does.
On that note, we have to wrap it up. Thank you so much. Pedro De Jesus, Nick Katcherubis, and Adrian Samuels-Gibbs, thank you for coming. In Chicago, more than 20,000 abandoned buildings sit vacant, from foreclosed properties to fire-damaged structures. All have their own stories, and one Chicago man is telling them one paint stroke at a time.
This is an alternative to demolition.
This is Chris Topher's calling, changing blight into beauty. The former computer software rep turned artist began what he calls artistic board-ups in 1995 after noticing so many abandoned buildings around Chicago.
What I noticed in Chicago is a lot of houses were getting demolished, and what I realized is that a lot of them were in pretty good shape, but the main issue was that they didn't look very good. It seemed to me it was a waste of money to tear down a house just because it didn't look good. I kind of proposed to the city, let's do something to make it look better and more secure.
That something was artistic transformation. With some paint, lumber, and a touch of TLC, Chris enhances the structure's dull frame by adding a splash of color and a little curve appeal. For 19 years, Chris has boarded up and painted more than 750 dilapidated buildings. He's left his mark in Chicago, Milwaukee, New Orleans, Minneapolis, and Wyoming. About 90% of the properties were saved from demolition, including the home of blues legend Muddy Waters.
That was one where the private owners, actually relatives of Muddy, really didn't want to put a lot of money into it, and they kind of had people come in and out of it. So historic preservation is important.
Chris knows he can't do it alone. He works closely with residents of the community and organizations like Chicago's Neighborhood Housing Services. On this day, everyone is out to lend a hand.
Okay, you want to plant some flowers?
The neighbors are elated that there are people outside of the community that care about getting these homes back into productive use. They love the fact that when they pass by, it's not a reminder that there's a vacancy on the block.
Chris knows the beauty he creates is more than skin deep. He's planting the seeds of transformation in communities in desperate need.
It's kind of looking at a emergency room in a hospital, and you're trying to clean out the wound in some patient, but you're doing all the surgery without really cleaning the wound. And so I make that analogy of this is kind of like cleaning the wound so that real healing can take place.
What a great idea. That's it for this week's show. You are now in the loop. To learn more about In the Loop, our stories, our guests, or to view past episodes, check out our website, where the conversation is going to continue right now on WYCC.org. I'm Chris Bury, and on behalf of Barbara Pinto, good night.